Now, meantime, Dr. Fauci, your friend, seems to have really crossed over into true God complex territory. I mean, he's a bureaucrat, but boy, talking about himself in the way he has, I will tell you, as a private citizen, somewhat alarmed me. This is him over the weekend talking about the attacks on him by senators like Ted Cruz, and I'm sure you were in there too, and talking about why he finds it inappropriate. This is soundbite one.
My job has been totally focused on doing what I can with the talents and the influence I have to make scientific advances to protect the health of the American public. So anybody who spends lies and threatens and all that theater that goes on with some of the investigations and the congressional committees and the Rand Pauls and all that other nonsense, that's noise, Margaret. That's noise.
Senator Cruz told the Attorney General you should be prosecuted.
Yeah. I have to laugh at that. I should be prosecuted. What happened on January 6th, Senator? I'm just going to do my job. And I'm going to be saving lives, and they're going to be lying. Anybody who's looking at this carefully realizes that there's a distinct anti-science flavor to this. So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, well, people could recognize there's a person there, so it's easy to criticize. But they're really criticizing science because I represent science.
Criticism of him is criticism of science because he represents science. And you're a medical doctor yourself. Your thoughts on it?
You know, I think there's a great danger when a government bureaucrat sets themselves up as representing science. It, to me, doesn't conjure up images of freedom. It conjures up images of the medieval church repressing science. You know, science should never be beholden to government imprimatur or government dogma. And the thing is, most of the time when he's talking about mandates or edicts that come from him, they're usually not based in science. So, for example, he's been saying we're under-vaccinated as a country. The truth is actually the opposite. Well over 90% of those over 65 at high risk have chosen voluntarily to get vaccinated. For children, he says, well, we should mandate it on the children. And yet the death rate among children is almost zero. And if you look at this and you say, well, do we have enough immunity to slow this down? It now appears, even according to the CDC, that well over 100 million people in America, a third to maybe a half of Americans have had COVID naturally. But if you don't count that natural immunity, then you jump to the conclusion, oh my, we're under-vaccinated, we must mandate this. And that's probably not the truth and very much open to debate. But for him to say to question him is to question the emperor of science, to question the almighty high priest of science is really something un-American, scary, and worrisome that we'd elevate anybody to such a position.
Do you think his power and newfound fame has gone to his head?
Without question. And the thing is that he wants to maintain as if his only goals are altruistic and he wants to help people, but he's been unwilling to discuss the origins of this virus. He's been unwilling to discuss that he still is in favor of funding gain-of-function research where they create viruses that don't exist in nature, and that there's a great deal of evidence that this pandemic started in a lab in Wuhan. Because he's unwilling to even countenance that or have any discussion of that, he continues to support funding the lab in Wuhan. He continues to support funding gain-of-function, very dangerous research in our country. And there are many professors, many esteemed professors in the DNA world, in this microbiology world, who are worried that we could create a virus, or one of these scientists could create a virus that could have 15% mortality or 50% mortality. And yet there's been no discussion of this because everybody is so beholden in Washington anyway to Fauci that I've been unable to have the Democrats commit to any hearing or any investigations on the origin of this virus. And that worries me because I think we could well have another pandemic worse than this come out of a lab.
Yeah, he continues to wiggle on gain of function, even though his group admitted, subsequent to his congressional testimony, that they did fund it through Peter Daszak's group, Eco Health Alliance. He's basically hung up on the definition. He kind of tries to weasel out of it, saying, "Well, the definition's not the same, and you can revise it all you want, but we never funded under my definition what is gain of function." Here he was on the Sunday shows trying to say that's just a meaningless term. Soundbite 2.
Well, the Intercept reporting is completely misleading because gain of function, matey, is a completely meaningless term unless you put it into context. Years ago, we paused all function on manipulating viruses to set guardrails and guidelines and to get rid of the ambiguous and misleading term of gain of function so that you could proceed with experiments if they fall within those guidelines. Then someone comes along and says, I don't like that definition. And according to my definition, you did, quote, gain of function. Again, so the meaningless term of gain of function, it doesn't mean anything.
What do you make of that, Senator?
What's not disputed are the experiments that happened in Wuhan and that continue to happen in the United States as well. They take an unknown virus from a bat cave. They basically dig a bunch of guano from a bat cave, which is not a particularly, enviable job. They dig up the guano. They get viruses from it that are unknown. They then take the genes for those viruses or the S protein from those viruses, mix them together with the genes from a known virus. Well, one of the known viruses that they are using in Wuhan and other places is the SARS virus. This is a coronavirus from the 2004 era that had a 15% mortality. So they take a virus that we know has a 15% mortality and they mix it together with an unknown virus. The good thing about the SARS virus is it was deadly, but it was not very transmissible. They're mixing it with an unknown virus to see if it makes it more transmissible. Dr. Fauci's argument is, well, we don't know whether it'll be more transmissible or not. But that's precisely the reason for the experiment, is to see if they can create viruses and then ask the question, is it more transmissible? So the experiments in Wuhan did find viruses that are more transmissible, more lethal, more deadly, which gained in function. And yet he says, well, those experiments happened, but because we didn't know they would gain in function in advance, they're not gain of function. If that sounds like parsing of words, that's exactly what it is. It's him wiggling away from responsibility. He realizes now that 5 million people died and 5 million families are grieving from the loss of people who died from a virus. And if this virus came from a lab that he was funding, absolutely, he should be ridden out of town on a rail.
That's the thing that's so infuriating about the whole thing, is you're trying to sort of figure out what happened in that lab. What did we fund? What didn't we? Should we be revising policy? Should we be holding people accountable? And he just keeps trying to, like a whack-a-mole, wiggle out from underneath your thumb, saying, well, it wasn't technically gain of function. Well, we didn't really do what you said we did. But I think Josh Rogan of the Washington Post, he's written the definitive book on this. He's been a very objective reporter on it. He put it in a way I think we can all understand. Quote, Fauci and the NIH were collaborating on risky research with a Chinese lab that has zero transparency and zero accountability during a crisis, and no one in a position of power addressed that risk. Fauci's arguing the system worked. It didn't. And he went on to add, the Wuhan lab took our money and know-how and built another secret part of the lab where they worked with the Chinese military. I mean, isn't that the point? Whatever you want to call it, that he can't deny that happened.
And realize that this isn't just partisan voices making this point. There's a professor from MIT, his name is Kevin Esfelt. He helped to develop the CRISPR technology, which may someday cure things like hemophilia and other genetic diseases. He's a known scholar, a known scientist, not a partisan. He wrote in the Washington Post in an op-ed about a month ago and said that this type of research, this gain of function research that Dr. Fauci is denying, this type of research could threaten our very civilization. It's a risk we should not be taking. This is coming from nonpartisans. There's another Dr. Ebright from Rutgers, been saying the same thing for 15 years. We are endangering civilization as we know it to create viruses that don't exist in nature with the risk that they could be released, particularly in some of these labs that have been cited for lack of safety in China. So this should not be a partisan issue. I cannot believe that there are not any Democrats in Congress who care about trying to prevent something like this from happening again. It's appalling. I've been fighting for 6 months for a hearing, and I cannot get a committee hearing on any of this.